Welcome to Unsilent with your hosts Dave and Brian. This is not another current events podcast. We're digging deeper, diagnosing, and discussing what's really going on today, how we got here, and providing observations for future generations.
Welcome to Unsilent. We're Brian and Dave. We're hoping you'll let us know where you think we got it right and where we completely missed the point, which you can do by visiting unsilentpodcast.com. So let's get into it. Brian, what are we going to talk about today?
Well, before we get to our topic, I think we should let everybody know we're actually, Dave and I are in the same room.
It's weird.
It is weird. I flew up to the People's Republic of Washington to make an in-person guest appearance. And so even though we're on two different cameras, Dave and I are actually in the same room, which is kind of cool to actually have a conversation in person. So good to see you, Dave.
It's good to see you. We haven't seen each other like this since we had pizza.
That's right. We had pizza and lunch this entire thing,
Exactly.
Which was, I don't know, 9 months ago or something like that?
Yeah.
It's quite a while. Anyhow, so historical things happened this week, or seemingly historical things, I think would matter in 70 years. I think they'll probably still be talking about this.
Sure.
We had, for the first time ever, a presidential nominee, front runner by like 50 points or whatever it is, removed from the ballot in Colorado.
Yeah.
So Donald Trump was taken off the ballot, and it kind of, so I think there's a couple of things we'll get into. I would imagine this insurrection will be something that would still be talked about in 70 years because it seems like it's a big deal, whether or not you think it was an insurrection. For the people who do, so if the side that thinks it was an insurrection, the worst thing since Pearl Harbor, which we've been hearing, if they come out of this crisis phase we're going to be in as the victors, for lack of a better word, I don't know how it's going to turn out, but for lack of a better word, if they get what they want through this whole thing, it will go down in history as, you know, next to Pearl Harbor, 9/11, the Civil War, like it's number 5.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Well, even number 4.
Yeah. If people like Dave and I, if our side is more like what we would hope to see come out of it, it'll be a footnote, and this is where a bunch of people lost their minds and said this thing that was a riot was this thing that was way worse than it was, and whatever. And so, because Donald Trump was there and he said remarks the day of, like, he's now the insurrection guy, right? So that's kind of my very jaded and biased a quick explanation. So real quick on the insurrection, because I think this matters, and it will matter again even 70 years from now. So it seems to me like, my opinion is this was a riot at the Capitol. Right. And for it to be an insurrection, it can only be one of two things. Either these people were so stupid that they didn't realize they couldn't take down the United States government without any weapons. Like, that's one. Like, it was a real insurrection, but they just forgot to show up with any weapons. Right. And they thought that they would, like, you know, according to like referencing back to Joe Biden talking about you can't take on F-35s. Right. He literally said that this year. Yeah. So either they showed up to the Capitol with like no weapons and just thought like they would just like meander their way down the halls and like take over the government, or the government is so fragile that any kind of large scale organized dissent is just not acceptable. Right. Am I exaggerating that? I know I'm exaggerating some, but am I exaggerating too much? It kind of feels like it kind of has to be one of those camps, right?
Well, so what you're talking about, Brian, is a normal definition of insurrection.
Yeah.
You know, if normal people think about, and by normal people, I mean people that didn't go to Harvard Law School.
Right.
So if people,
normal people, you said it right.
Yeah, normal people. If normal people think about an insurrection, we think about taking guns and going and overthrowing the government and installing a new person. Right. So that's what
Castro led an insurrection.
Exactly.
Yeah, Mao led an insurrection.
The communists overthrew the czar. So all those were insurrections.
The shaman, maybe not so much. The QAnon shaman, maybe not so much, right?
I don't think he was ever really in position of power. So, but this is the thing that's interesting about what Colorado did, is they went on a novel legal theory of what an insurrection is. So an insurrection in their mind, as I understand it, and in a number of people's minds, was not speaking out sooner to stop what happened, or calling people who then, went into the Capitol building, or doing things that is outside of the normal. I mean, the people that rioted, they never had any chance at all, zero of stopping the election, of overthrowing the government. It was, like you say, it was impossible.
Yeah.
They delayed a government proceeding by a couple of hours.
For sure.
And, and it was bad.
And to be fair, like that riot happened.
Yeah.
Damage. People who did things that were against the law, in my opinion, fully should be prosecuted.
They have to be punished. Absolutely.
And I see this as somebody who believes in peaceful protests. Like, if you do things that violate the law, even in a peaceful protest, like, you got to pay the consequence. That's the point, is showing that you're willing to pay the consequence to voice your opinion.
Exactly. That's civil disobedience.
Civil disobedience. 100%. I get all that stuff. Even in cases where I want to throttle, like right now, the thing is like people like lining up in the roads, like they're like gluing themselves to the concrete or something like that, whatever that is. Like, even those cases, like I want to like, it really makes me angry because I picture the person in the ambulance who can't get to the hospital.
Right.
I picture the person, like the one guy had a really sad story. He was on parole and couldn't get to his job, and he was going to have to go back to prison because if he was late to his job, and these people were like blocking the streets. Even in those circumstances, like, I get it. This is what peaceful demonstrations are.
Right.
So I say this as a person who even though it's really inconvenient for a lot of times, that this is what changed the world. This is what changed the civil rights movement. It's this kind of thing. So, and I think those people should be prosecuted for laws they broke.
Absolutely.
And I don't think it was an insurrection where they were trying to take over the government.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and so here's where we find ourselves then. We find ourselves in a position where that kind of insurrection, quote unquote, that kind of riot could cause a societal collapse.
Right.
I mean, I don't think it's overstating it to say that what the Colorado Supreme Court did is, in fact, it's interesting. Here's a little tidbit for you might not have heard. So there's 7 judges, 7 justices. Mm-hmm. The 4 of them that went to Ivy League schools voted for it. The 3 that didn't go to Ivy League schools, that went to Colorado schools, voted against it. Right. So that's, just a side tidbit there. But the interesting thing about this is they deemed it under the 14th Amendment, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, as an insurrection. Now, they're a state court, and states do have broad power over their own elections.
Right.
But they classified a federal crime or a federal insurrection that is in place since the Civil War to prevent, Civil War generals and other people that did participate in an armed rebellion against the United States. They deemed that's why it was there in the first place. Right. So what they did is they did that, as the dissenting judges there pointed out, without discovery, without charging a crime, without a trial, without any of those kinds of things. Right. Now,
without proof that there was an insurrection, it's just an opinion. Yeah, because there was no conviction,
without a definition of insurrection.
Right.
So I think it would be useful to kind of analyze what happened and what's going to happen from a legal perspective, because that leads us directly into the potential for really, really hard times for the society, for the potential for having the United States become ununited. So what the Supreme Court's going to be asked to do is they're going to be asked to determine whether the Colorado Supreme Court was right in that it was an insurrection.
Right.
So whatever the Supreme Court does is going to apply to all 50 states. And this is why it has to be done soon, because even though Colorado, it doesn't matter to the campaigns if Trump's on the ballot or not, because he's not going to win Colorado.
Right.
Same thing's true with California. But what does matter is Michigan's looking at it. That's a swing state. Yeah. The swing states are looking at it. And so the Supreme Court's going to have to decide relatively quickly. Otherwise, you're going to have 50 states making all their own decisions.
So Dave, this, like they'll do what they're doing. And we'll update later on like what they're going to do. But the part that this ties in for me and like what it means for the future and like our societal, like how this all works and things like that is we have to kind of figure. I mean, not we, and we don't have to, but it's interesting to kind of go down this path of trying to figure out: is there a time and place where right now, basically, Colorado's saying, we don't care if you want to vote for this person. We're not going to let you.
Right.
Okay, fine. And I don't agree with that, obviously. Right. But that's what they're doing. Right. Essentially, they're saying, we don't care if you want to vote for this person. We're not allowing it to happen.
Right.
What if, like, so to put things in context where it's not you and I being unfair to somebody else, let's put this in context where it would matter for us. So let's say that you and I are going along, living our lives, and a similar thing like Castro comes here, and like in Seattle right now, there's out and out socialists on the city council in the city council in Seattle.
Yeah.
Let's say they wanted to run for, president and senators and Congress people and whatever, and this movement took off, and you and I didn't like it,
right?
But the movement spread.
Right.
And pretty soon, 65% of the population wants to be socialist, and this movement that started in Seattle and the Seattle City Council now is a nationwide phenomenon. I don't like it, but it's happening.
Right.
And the majority of the people, when they vote for these communists and socialists,
right?
And you and I are just kind of left out. Is there a time where somebody in power should say, no, that's not what this country's about. We're going to stop this. Or are guys like you and I we're just at the mercy of the will of the people?
Well, at some point, a society has to, not at some point, there has to be a basic agreement about what's allowable in a society. And so if at some point 65% of the people decide our form of government, and that's really what we're talking about, our form of government no longer works, then as our founders did, that's what our founders said. They said, look, when the form of government you're under no longer works, you have an obligation to explain why it no longer works and why you're going to do what you want to do and why you're going to separate. So at some point, it almost becomes academic, because if 65% of the people decide we don't want to be a freedom-based democracy or republic anymore,
the experiment's over.
The experiment's over.
We're going back.
It's going to be over. Yeah. I mean, it's going to be over now. But the way that happens, so the question is how that happens.
Yeah.
So in this case, you've got the basic operating system of the land is the Constitution.
Right.
Now, if you have the basic societal pact that keeps everything together, if you've got different sides saying it says completely different things, completely different things, then, and that's what happened in the Civil War.
Right.
One side said, no, this is not, you can't be having slaves. That's not, look at the founding documents. That's not
Which was a new idea, by the way.
Which was a new idea.
They had founded the company, and there's plenty of people who didn't like it when the country was founded, but they compromised, they did what they did, and they ended up with what they ended up were there were slaves. And then people fought it long enough. John Adams and those kinds of people fought it long enough. They said, we're not doing this anymore, and enough is enough, and we're stopping now, which was a new idea, right? So, so they were the crazy ones coming along with the new idea.
Exactly. Now, in this case, what we have is we've got one set of people saying that the fundamental qualifications to be a leader and the fundamental qualifications of what constitutes an insurrection is different from like the common thing that you and I just talked about. Right. This is what an insurrection is.
So if the majority of the people go along with that new idea, though, like that's just the way it's going to be.
That's the way it's going to be.
That's the way it's going to be. And you and I probably, I won't say you and I. I'll say for me, like, I don't know what the alternative the government would have, but to do what the people want. So if the majority of the people said, we want to get rid of the Constitution, we want to get rid of all this stuff, it's led to too much disparity in outcomes and whatever. We want to have a socialist, communist, whatever. What are you going to do? Right?
You're not going to be able to resist.
Except for, here's the problem. With these two ideologies, specifically socialism and communism, as you and I have covered in previous episodes, the way that they work is by extracting income and wealth and property from people out, a large group of people.
Sure.
So the part I do have a disagreement with is, okay, me and you don't want this, and we say we don't want to be involved in this, but to make communism work, we would be forced to be involved. Like the wall in Germany was to keep Eastern Europeans in, not to keep Western Europeans out.
Right, exactly.
So that's the part where I go, well, wait a second, that's not a political ideology anymore. Now we're basically political prisoners, and that's where I do jump and say, this is not okay. Right. So if they had some kind of idea like, we're going to have this new political ideology, we're going to adapt, ancient Hawaiians' approach to things.
Right.
But if you don't like it, you can go live in Canada, or you can go live in Mexico, or you can go live in Uzbekistan or whatever. Like, you have the freedom to leave because we know we're changing things.
Right.
That feels different to me. Like the majority of people saying they want this thing. I don't. I have a path out to go pursue my life somewhere else.
Right.
It's just bad luck for me. I happen to be in a point in time in a place geographically where people change their minds.
Yep.
And I have to go figure it out somewhere else.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
Sure.
I'm not okay with the part where we're all changing this, and to make this function economically, like we need you to stay, and you're going to be forced to do things you don't want to help fund it.
Right.
That's the part I don't like. It's not the political change that I dislike.
Sure.
It's the requiring people to do things really against their will that I don't like. Like if they said we're going to become like the state of Arizona where I live, we're going to become a social state, we're going to secede from union, and if you don't like it, like you get 2 years to get your shit together and move out. Okay, but life happens. Like what am I going to do? Yeah. I can't stop that. Okay,
right.
That's not what's happening though.
Well, see here, there's another wrinkle to the formulation you just created, though. So in any time you have these kind of revolutions that we're talking about, it's almost never the majority that do it.
Right.
It's a small, vocal, loud minority.
Yeah. 3% is the number I've heard for the Revolutionary War. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but that's the number like people who actually fought in the war was 3% of the population.
Well, in the people that believe in it, I mean, so if you look at Tsarist Russia, or if you look at, there's general discontent in every kind of situation like that, but there isn't necessarily general agreement that this new way of doing things is the right way to do things.
Gotcha.
There's a small, powerful, very vocal minority that pushes it. And see, this is where it becomes difficult because and this is where the moral calculation that you and I are talking about becomes very interesting because if 60-70% of the people decide in America, hey, we're going to be this other kind of thing, it's like, well, okay, that's the way it's going to be. And that's, there's problems with majority rule, but at the end of the day, that's that. But if 20% or 30% say, here's what we're going to do, and they're going to force it down on us, then that's when you get to things like, civil war.
Right.
That's when you get to things like civil unrest and things. And that's where this potential is because you've got a very small.
So that's why I think this conversation is interesting and important because I think there's a large percentage of people here today that, again, if their side prevails, the message to Kenny G's generation would be, well, that's what everybody wanted.
Right. Yeah.
And that is not the case.
The victors write the history.
The victors get to write history. And I can like that or not like it, doesn't matter. That's what it is. Right. I get that. I think it's important for us to tell the story, though, in this moment, in our emotional state, as all these values changes are happening to us, not with us.
Right.
They are being forced upon us by a small group, and they are acting as if they have majority in support when they really do not, and they are changing language and rules and values and I hate to use these words, but the building blocks of our society, basically, they're altering them and altering the meaning. Basic stuff like we now use words like misinformation and disinformation. We used to say truth or lie. Like it's either true or it's not true.
It's not true. Yeah,
that doesn't matter anymore. True or untrue doesn't matter anymore. Now it's if it's misinformation, it's bad. If it's disinformation, it's bad. If it's approved by the government, it's good. Like these are radical shifts from how we used to have discourse.
Right.
And they're acting as if everybody's cool with this, except for a few handful of bumpkins who won't get on board.
Right.
But that's not the reality.
And this is the pattern for Kenny G. So in Kenny G's day, it's probably not going to be, a loud, boisterous orange candidate.
Yeah, no, it'll be the Autobots and Decepticons. Of course.
Exactly. There you go. It'll be the aliens.
With the Borg against the Decepticons, maybe.
That'd be an interesting battle. But the patterns will be the same.
Right.
Just like the patterns have always been the same in these situations. A small group of loud people pretending that they're the majority. And if you listen to politicians, what do they say? Well, the American people are saying X, and it's really 2% of
the American people know.
Yeah, and this is what the American people want. Well, in reality, it's what you want.
It's what you want. Yeah,
but it's not what the rest of us want. Yeah. But there's a dependence in every one of those situations, there's a dependence on people saying, I just want, hopefully it'll blow over, in fact, in the Declaration, it says that people are predisposed, I'm paraphrasing, people are predisposed to suffer as long as suffering is tolerable.
Yeah.
But there comes a point where we can't suffer that anymore. And that's that tipping point when something turns from resistance to revolution.
Right. And that's the part for me that, after getting exposed to the fourth turning and, talking to you about this stuff, there's certain things like taxation without representation that ring a bell.
Yeah.
Like taxation without representation is going on now.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
Tons of people taxes are being extracted from, and their input is not only not taken, but squashed.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
It's not that much different. Right.
Right.
So I guess the question I'm asking is like, during the Civil War, Lincoln flat out he ended habeas corpus,
Yes.
like the one of the foundation cornerstones of our legal system.
Exactly.
He basically just preempted it.
Exactly.
Completely violated the law.
Yep.
But we look back at him and say he was arguably the best president we ever had. Maybe number two, depending on maybe number three, depending on who you ask. But he's in the top three for sure, with 80% of all people you would ask.
Yeah.
And he completely violated the law. He did everything he had to do inside and outside the law to keep the Union together and force people to do things they didn't want to do.
Exactly.
And we say he's a great leader. Now, if we put it in our terms now, the same thing. If now my example was 65%, but what if it is only 30% who want to be communists, but they're the 30% in charge,
right?
And they say same thing, like, hey, we're going to stop these precedents. We're going to stop honoring the Constitution the way we have. We're going to kind of change the language of things, but we know best. It was okay with Lincoln because you and I like Lincoln. It's not okay now because we don't like what the direction is going now. But is it really that different?
I mean, in practical terms, no. I mean, it's sort of what you might call the fog of political war.
Right.
Right? Because they talk about warfare and you get plans and tactics and we're going to deploy people here and do this and that and the other thing. But when it gets down to it, I don't know. I've never been in battle. My dad has, but I've never had. And, but they say that when it gets down to it, in the fog of war, just chaos happens.
Right.
And you're hoping you're going to get to your objective and you've got good plans, but lots of unknowns happen.
Yeah. That's sophistication goes out the door.
Sophistication goes out the door.
Yeah. Nuance, all that stuff. Yeah.
And I'm sure that Lincoln didn't come into office, for instance, planning to undermine the Constitution.
Right.
The man loved language. He loved thought. He's a very.
We have 16-hour debates talking about the good parts of it. Like,
exactly.
I don't even know how you do a 16-hour debate. That's
oh my word! Yeah, I don't think people today could do that.
Yeah,
I don't think I could do that. But
he clearly loved the country. He clearly loved the law. He was he was an attorney. Like he clearly loved all these things. But when it came down to it, he did whatever he had to do to win.
Yeah, and it was because he had, and I still have friends that think Lincoln was a bad guy. I have a friend of mine he's a lawyer type. He thinks specifically because of habeas corpus that Lincoln was a bad guy. Yeah. And whenever I quote him online, he says, "Why you keep quoting that guy? He's unconstitutional tragedy." Yeah. Okay, well, but the point was that Lincoln saw a higher principle, and that is keep the country together, keep it from collapsing. And this principle then allowed it was really the end justifies the means.
Right, and which is what the justices of the Colorado Supreme Court would say.
Exactly,
and it's what the justices of the California Supreme Court, the election, whoever's in charge of the Secretary of State or whoever's in charge of elections, that's what they will say. And I guess what I'm getting at is the victors write history. So if their side prevails, they will be heroes.
Right,
and if their side does not prevail, they will be seen as the Thomas Jeffersons.
Well, and here's the other alternative. If their side prevails or our side prevails, there's a third option in there, and that is if the whole thing goes to hell and nobody prevails, because chaos ensues.
Yeah,
and this is where you get dictators, right? Because this side didn't win, this side didn't win. Somebody steps up and says, who's a good communicator that maybe nobody even knows today, and says, I've got the answers. I can run the whole thing. And people are so war weary and weary of everything, that they're like, okay, well, so this is really where
or something,
dissolution happens.
or China and Pakistan and India and Russia could get together and launch a nuke at New York City.
Right.
And we're so united that we get past these disagreements. And we're so united against an external outside force. That we have no choice. Yeah, there's, of course, lots of things can happen that you and I would never be able to predict in a million years.
Right.
The ideology, though, if barring some outside intervention from a third party getting involved, and barring some kind of just new government kind of takeover, whether it's like a power vacuum, like it's filled by a dictator, like you're talking about, or the people all kind of figure out, like, hey, the 3% in charge of the 3% in the Washington D.C. area, and maybe the rest of us just get together and like push them out and like go back to what we had. Like there's that version to it. Barring one of those two things, it's gonna some version of either a more traditional appreciation or adaptation or whatever, how we look at the Constitution, things like that will prevail, or this kind of new idea
or a new thing.
So
exactly.
And it seems like it's the behaviors are not that different. again, looking at what Lincoln did then, which you and I admire him. At least I do.
Absolutely, I do. Yeah.
And the behaviors are the same as what we see with people now. It's just the difference is, for me, he was doing it for people to, in my view, benefit their lives, and people now are doing it to benefit themselves.
Sure, absolutely. Well, and it could. Part of the problem with this too is it could push both sides to that sort of extreme type behavior, and so you've got, when our media has been pushed that way, our institutions have been pushed that way, to the point where it's no longer I'm a public servant, but I'm using the public sphere to ratchet up my own wealth. And I mean,
they used to call themselves representatives.
Yeah. Now
now they're moral leaders.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's, so the and that's part of the problem as well, that everything gets pushed to that potential breaking point.
Yeah.
And so then that pattern repeats over and over throughout history. That's what Kenny G will face in the future as well, I'm sure.
And the thing for Kenny G is, if he's where I was in 2008, and probably you were as well, the idea of this happening then, like to 2008, like if you would have told me this stuff 15 years ago, like this is what we're going to be facing, I'd be like, there's no way. Yeah. Like, we have the most friendly, get along. Yeah, there's people who don't get along and things like that. They argue over tax code. They argue over, gerrymandering and that kind of stuff. They don't argue over like whether or not you can vote for a guy who's leading the polls by 50% on who can be president. Like, that's not going to happen here. Are you kidding me? And here we are.
And it happens. It happens so quickly too.
Right. And it, to me, it feels like the momentum is going, like it's unstoppable.
Right.
Like the next thing will be a retaliation of this, and then there'll be a retaliation of that. And there'll be, it just feels like it's going. So that's why it's so easy for me to hear things about like the fourth turning, how these happen in cycles, and go, well, I feel like I'm on the Ferris wheel now. Yeah. Like the momentum is going in that direction, barring some very articulate, wise person who can speak to both hearts.
Right.
Which I don't even know how a person can do that, because I don't know what people who have, I don't know what people could possibly have in common to overcome basic things we argue about. Like right now, like, should a 5-year-old be able to cut off their penis?
Yes,
like,
exactly right.
That seems like if you don't agree about that, like there's where do you go?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't think there's anybody that could bring us together around the issues. I think what happens in this situation, if somebody does a personality could bring us out of this, it would not be somebody that says, I'm on this issue or I'm on that issue. It would be somebody who says, I feel your pain. I hear you. And what I propose is going to be pain for both sides. Somebody who could actually just appeal to the emotions of the country.
Yeah.
Appeal to the, say that for the left, this is patriotism. For the right, this is patriotism. But we're all patriots. We're all going to come together. Yeah. I think that's where that could happen, because I don't think anybody can bridge the issues.
The January 6th thing is a good example of that. You have these people who've been in prison now for, solitary confinement for 3 years now, or whatever it's been.
Yeah.
Many of them went months and months and months without a court date. Habeas corpus, all that kind of stuff. Like all that stuff pushed to the side.
Right.
Half the country says, good, and I can't wait for the next thing they're going to get, which is even worse.
Exactly.
And the other half of the country says this is despicable. You can't treat people like this.
Yep.
Like they deserve their day in court. If they get charged, convicted of a crime, they deserve a punishment befitting that crime.
Yep.
I don't know how you bring those people together. This like this Colorado Supreme Court, this thing just feels like the next ratcheting up of the thing.
Yeah.
And then, Texas now is talking about it, or Florida, they're talking about like, okay, we'll keep Biden out, and then that'll ratchet up again.
Right.
It like the wheels are coming off, right?
Yeah.
And so I think the interesting thing for Kenny G also is I would, again, putting me in the shoes of person looking back and judging those in World War II and Civil War and things like that. There's always this kind of, how they not see this coming? Well, I think we can see it coming. I think not see it coming. I think we can all feel the amplitude, the velocity, the consequences, the boundaries that are going to be pushed. Like, I think we can all feel that.
Right.
I don't think there's many people who are just like, nah, it's going to get 6 months from now, it's all going to blow over. I don't know anybody talking like that. Do you?
No. And but here's the delusion that both sides are under. And I was having a discussion with somebody on the other side of this discussion last night. And I said, look, here's what happens in this situation. You have two sides that see it exactly opposite and are 100% convinced in the righteousness of their position.
Yeah.
And therefore they believe, like I was talking to somebody who arrests Trump and perp march, all that kind of stuff. And my response was, what do you think is going to happen if, then we'll be back to a just and fair society? No, what's going to happen is then Biden gets perp walked down. And just like you said, Florida and Texas decide, Biden's family was in bed with the Chinese and therefore
we have proof of the Biden family taking cash and writing checks to Joe Biden now.
Exactly. And so that's aiding and abetting the enemy according to
high crimes and or high crimes and treason or whatever it's called.
Well, you could Section 3 of the 14th Amendment.
Treason.
It's aiding and abetting the enemy. You could say just as credibly that's that.
Right.
But
if you are willing to push aside precedent and like the what's it called, the patterns of law, I can't remember what it's called right now, but like the precedent and the way things are supposed to work and the way they always have worked. If you're willing to push those aside, and which again, right now you'd have a hard time saying, well, the one side can, but the other side can't, because the people who are being squeezed out are going to say, well, who's standing up for us?
Right, exactly. Well, if you're willing to put aside precedent and what are the inevitable consequences.
Yeah.
I mean, and this is the thing, there's the inevitable consequences. You can game this out pretty simply. So this side does this, that side does that. The China and Russia and Iran all of a sudden see, they're not going to be, they're consumed with their own little, civil war thing. So we're going to go do this.
Yeah.
And then eventually we say, the world's coming apart. Maybe we should put aside our interpretations of the 14th Amendment for a little bit and be aware that we're about to be invaded.
Right.
And that's that whole fourth turning narrative again.
Yeah.
That's where I was listening in the later portions of Neil Howe's book, The Fourth Turning is Here.
Yeah.
He talks about, is it civil war? Is it global? Is it world war? Or is it both?
Yeah.
And it could very well be both.
Yeah. It does feel like, to me, it feels like very much not just the haves and have-nots. There's always been that.
Sure.
This feels like the super powerful, super elite.
Yeah.
Like off the charts, higher level elite, like not the 80-20 rule, like where the 20% have everything and 80% don't. No, we're talking like the 0.8%
right.
versus the 99.2%.
Yeah.
It does feel there's a bit of that. There does feel like you listen to the World Economic Forum talk and the Klaus Schwab guy, like you couldn't make a better cartoonish version of a villain. Like it's not possible with the Australian or the Austrian accent, the whole thing, and like he's like the perfect villain. And I heard him say last week, like we won't even need to have elections because we'll know exactly what the outcomes are going to be because AI is going to be predictive and now and not just deciphering things but also predicting now. And it's like, okay, that's fine for you because you're the one who gets to manipulate the data.
Right.
And we're all going to be happy because we're going to eat bugs. And I'm like, well, I don't think you've ever eaten a bug, Klaus. Like, I don't imagine you've ever had a bug in your life. I imagine you think it's okay for the people in Ethiopia to have bugs.
You bet.
And the people in New Mexico to have bugs.
Right.
Probably not a lot of bugs on Klaus's plate.
Right, exactly.
And so it does kind of feel like, But then you kind of go, okay, but am I going down the tinfoil hat rabbit trail here where I'm being sucked into all these conspiracy theories?
Sure.
And maybe we'll talk about that next week where it's some of the stuff is like it does feel momentum's picking up. It does feel like things are getting worse instead of better every week, at least not every day necessarily, but every week or two there's like a new thing like this was last night.
Only every week or two.
And it's like, okay, we've just crossed another boundary that was sacred that's no longer sacred, and that now there's going to be, of course, some kind of retaliation or retribution.
Yep.
And then that'll extend the boundary the other way, and it does feel like that.
Yeah.
And it feels inevitable that we're going to have this crisis, whatever it's going to be. And again, who knows if it's going to be civil war or world war, but I don't know if the technology is going to be such that the elites will have the levers of technology to the degree where the little guy can't fight back. But then I think, well, it's probably always been like that. The people who had the first Gatling gun wasn't some guy in Kentucky in his barn. It was the government.
Yeah. Well, yeah. See, that's exactly it. I think about the same thing. I think about a good example of that is Afghanistan and the Soviet Union.
Right.
Soviet Union was a world superpower, and they got their butts kicked by a bunch of cave-dwelling mujahideen in Afghanistan.
Or us in Vietnam.
So the elites always have an overestimation of their own power and their own ability to control things. Megalomaniacs. I mean, Hitler had an if you bring up Hitler, then the conversation goes down fast. But he had an overestimation of his ability. Napoleon, had an overestimation of his ability. So when people are in that position of power and they're surrounded by that sort of sphere of invincibility, they have an overestimation of their ability to bring about world utopia. And it never works. It's never worked. It never has worked. And I don't think the technology exists. Frankly, I don't think the technology will ever exist to actually allow that to happen.
Really interesting.
No, I don't think so.
You're a technological guy, so
right?
That's
well,
coming from you.
And look at the beginning of our episode and our technological challenges.
Right.
So
8 minutes in, all of a sudden everything just stopped. If you're wondering what that glitch was, 8 minutes in, it's because everything just shut off. We had to start over again.
Yeah, here we are. I would have thought 30 years ago when I first started doing technology that it would have been all smooth. But no, I think that the human equation is the one that ultimately really matters. And that's why the outcomes of these things, even though we don't know the details of the outcome, we know that we're in a crisis era. We know that crisis era is going to somehow continue to snowball downhill.
Right.
And we know that it's going to end in finally when we're in a spot of what have we just done to ourselves the last 5 or 10 years? We're about to die as a country. We're about to die as a culture. We need to get together and get serious about real life and not worry about pronouns and other things that everybody gets freaked out about today.
Yeah, for sure. Well, as we say every week, if you think we're misrepresenting something here, we want to know. We want to hear what you guys think. Part of the excitement for Dave and I is to start a conversation and have other folks chime in and say, "No, you guys are missing it." Like, people in my neighborhood don't talk like that. People in my neighborhood don't think like that. I do think this is all going to blow over in 6 months. I would love to hear somebody say that and hear some reasons why.
Make a good argument for
that, because I would love to hear why it feels to you like that's the case. And you can go to unsilentpodcast.com. You can go check out our Rumble channel. The videos are there every week. There's a great comment section on there for that kind of thing. Of course, you can see us on Spotify or hear us on Spotify and all the other places you can get podcasts as well. Check out unsilentpodcast.com. Give us a like and a share and all that kind of stuff if you see us on those things. And anything else on this topic, Dave? You think we got this wrapped up pretty well?
I think we've pretty well described the end of the world, Sean.
Yeah. All right, so that's it for this week, and we'll see you all next week.
Do you want to be Unsilent? Make your voice heard on our social media channels and share where you think we got it right or wrong. Go to unsilentpodcast.com for social links so you can join the discussion.